Day 116. Each day I pace the confines of my cage. The flame forest to the south and east, the forested ravines to the northeast, and the cleft to the north and west. The 70 will not let me descend into the cleft beyond the basilica. The cruciform will not let me get more than 10 kilometers from the cleft. At first I could not believe this. I had resolved to enter the flame forest, trusting to luck and to God's help to see me through. But I had gone no more than 2 kilometers into the fringes of the forest, then pain stuck me in the chest and arms and head. I was sure that I was having a massive heart attack. But as soon as turned back toward the cleft, the symptoms ceased. I experimented for some time and the results were invariably the same. Whenever I ventured deeper into the flame forest, away from cleft, the pain would return and increase in severity until I turned back. I began to understand other things. Yesterday I happened across the wreckage of the original siege ship shuttle as I explored to the north. Only a rusted vine and meshed rack of metal remains among the rocks at the edge of the flame forest near the ravine. But crouching among the exposed alloy ribs of the ancient craft, I could imagine the rejoicing of the 70 survivors, their short voyage to the cleft, their eventual discovery of the basilica, and what? Conjectures beyond that point are useless, but suspicion remain. Tomorrow I will attempt another physical exam of one of the Bikura. Perhaps now that I am of the cruciform, they will allow it. Each day I do a med scan of myself. The method remain, perhaps thicker, perhaps not. I am convinced that they are purely parasitic, although my body has shown no sign of this. I peer at my face in the pool near the waterfall and see only the same long, aging countenance that I have learned to dislike in recent years. This morning, while gazing at my image in the water, I opened my mouth wide, half thinking that I would see grey filaments and nematode clusters growing from the roof of my mouth and the back of my throat. There was nothing. Day 117. The Bikura are sexless, not celibate or hermaphroditic or undeveloped, sexless. They are as devoid of external or internal genitalia as a child's flow foam doll. There is no evidence that the penis or testes or comparable female organs or testes organs have atrophied or been surgically altered. There is no sign that they were ever existed. Urine is conducted through a primitive uretana terminating in a small chamber continuous with the anus and sort of crude cloaca. Beta allowed the examination. The med scanner confirmed that my eyes would not believe. Del and Theta also agreed to be scanned. I also absolutely no doubt that the rest of the 70 are equally sexless. There is no sign that they have been altered. I would suggest that they had all been born that way, but from what kind of parents? And how do this sexless lump of human clay plan to reproduce? It must be tied in with the cruciform in some way. When I was finished with their med scans, I stripped and stood it myself. The cruciform rises from my chest like pink scar tissue, but I am still a man. For how long? Day 133. Alpha is dead. I was with him 3 mornings ago when he fell. We were about 3 kilometers east, hunting for chalma tubers in the large boulders near the edge of the cleft. It had been remaining most of the past 2 days, and the rocks were quite slippery. I looked up from my own scrambling just in time to see Alpha lose his footing and go sliding down a broad slab of stone over the edge. He did not shout. The only sound was the rasp of his robe against the rock, followed several seconds later by the sickening dropped melon sound of his body striking a ledge 80 meters below. It took me an hour to find a route down to him. Even before I began the treacherous descent, I knew it was too late to help, but it was my duty. Alpha's body was half wedged between 2 large rocks. He must have died instantly. His arms and legs were splintered and the right side of his skull has been crushed. Blood and brain tissue clugged to the wet rock like the refuse of a sad picnic. I wept as I stood over the little body. I do not know why I wept, but I did. And as I wept, I administered extreme unction and prayed that God would accept the soul of his poor sexless little person. Later I rubbed the body in wines, laboriously climbed the 8 meters of a cliff, and pausing frequently to pant with exhaustion, pulled the broke corpse up to me. There was little interest as I carried the body of Alpha into the Bikura village. Eventually Beta and half a dozen others wandered over to stare down indefinitely at the corpse. No one asked me how he had died. After a few minutes the small crowd disappeared. Later I carried Alpha's body to the promontory where I had buried Took so many weeks earlier. I was digging the shallow grave with a flat stone with when Gamma appeared. The Bikura's eyes widened, and for a brief second I thought I saw emotions cross those bland features. "What are you doing?" asked Gamma. "Burying him." I was too tired to say more. I leaned against a thick chalma root and rested. "No," it was a command. "He is of the cruciform." I started Gamma turn and walked quickly back to the village. When the Bikura was gone, I pulled off the crate fiber tarp I had draped over the corpse. Alpha was, without any doubt, truly dead. It no longer mattered to him or the universe whether he was of the cruciform or not. The fall had stripped him of most of his clothes and all of his dignity. The right side of his skull had been cracked and emptied like a breakfast egg. One eye stared slightly toward Hyperion sky through a thickening film, while the other looked out lazy from under a dropping lid. His rib cage had been splintered so thoroughly that shards of bone protruded from his flesh. Both arms were broken and his leg had been twisted almost off. I had used the med scanner to perform a perfunctory autopsy, and it had revealed massive internal injuries. Even the poor devil's heart had been pulled by the force of the fall. I reached out and touched the cold flesh. Rigor mortis was setting in. My fingers brushed across the cross-shaped welt on his chest, and I quickly pulled my hand away. The cruciform was warm. "Stand away." I looked up to see Beta and the rest of the Bikura standing there. I had no doubt that they would murder me in a second if I did not move away from the corpse. As I did so, as I idiotically frightened part of my mind noted that the 70 were now the 39. It seemed funny at the time. The Bikura lifted the body and moved back toward the village. Beta looked at the sky, looked at me and said, "It is almost time. You will come." We went down into the cleft. The body was carefully tied into a basket of wine and lowered with us. The sun was not yet illuminating the interior of the basilica when they set Alpha corpse on the broad altar and removed his remaining rags. I do not know what I expected next. Some ritual act of cannibalism, perhaps. Nothing would have surprised me. Instead, one of the Bikura raised his arms. just as the first shafts of colored light entered the basilica, and intoned, "You will follow the cross all of your days." The 69 kneel and repeated the sentence. I remained standing, did not speak. "You will be of the cruciform all of your days," said the little bikura, and the basilica echoed to the chorus of voices repeating the phrase. Light, the color and texture of clothing blood through a huge shadow of the cross on the far wall. "You will be of the cruciform now and forever and ever." Come the chant as the wind rose outside, and the organ pipes of the canyon wailed with the voice of tortured child. When the bikura stopped chanting, I did not whisper Amen. I stood there while others turned and left with the sudden, total indifference of spoiled children who have lost interest in their game. "There is no reason to stay," said Beta when the other had gone. "I want to," I said, expecting a command to leave. Beta turned without so much as a shrug and left me there. The light dimmed. I went outside to watch the sunset, and then I returned it had begun. And when I returned it had begun. Once, years ago in school, I saw a time-lapse holo showing the decomposition of a kangaroo mouse. A week's slow work of nature recycling had been accelerated to 30 seconds of horror. There was the sudden, almost comic bloating of the little corpse, then the stretching of flesh into the lesion, followed by the sudden appearance of maggots in the mouth, eyes and open sores, and finally the sudden and incredible corkscrew cleaning of the meat from bones. There is no other phrase that fits the image, as the pack of maggots spiraled right to left, head to tail, in a time-lapsed helix of carrion consumption that left behind nothing but bones and gristle and hide. Now it was a man's body I watched. I stopped and stared, the last of the light fading quickly. There was no sound in the echoing silence of the basilica except for the pounding of my pulse in my own ears. I stared at Alpha's corpse, first twitched and then visibly vibrated, almost levitating off the altar in the spastic violence of sudden decomposition. For a few seconds the cruciform seemed to increase in size and deepen in color, glowing as red as raw meat, and I imagined that I caught a glimpse of the network of the filaments and nematodes holding the distinguent body together like metal fibers in a sculptor's metallic model. The flesh flowed. I stayed in the basilica that night. The area around the altar remained lit by the glow of the cruciform on Alpha's chest. When the corpse moved, the light would cast strange shadows on the walls. I did not leave the basilica until Alpha left the third day, but most of the visible changes had taken place by the end of the first night. The body of the bikura I had named Alpha was broken down and rebuilt as I watched. The corpse that was left was not quite Alpha and not quite not Alpha, but it was intact. The face was a flow foam doll's face, smooth and unlined, features stamped in a slight smile. At surprise of the third day, I saw the corpse's chest begin to rise and fall, and I heard the first intake of breath, a rasp like water being poured into a leather pouch. Shortly before noon, I left the basilica to climb the vines. I followed Alpha. He was not spoken, will not reply. His eyes have a fixed, unfocused look, and occasionally he pauses, and if he hears distant voices calling. No one paid attention to us when we returned to the village. Alpha went to a hut and sits there now. I sit in mine. A minute ago I opened my robe and ran my fingers across the welt of the cruciform. It lies benignly under the flesh of my chest, waiting. Day 140. I am recovering from my wounds and loss of blood. It cannot be cut out with a sharpened stone. It does not like pain. I lost consciousness long before the pain or loss of blood demanded it. Each time I awoke and resumed cutting, it would be made to pass out. It doesn't like pain. Day 158. Alpha speaks somehow. Alpha speaks some now. He seems duller, slower and only vaguely aware of me, or anyone else, but he eats and moves. He appears to recognize me to some extent. The med scanner shows the heart and internal organs of a young man, perhaps of a boy of 16. I must wait until another Hyperion month, and then in 10 days, about 50 days in all, until the flame of forest became quiet enough for me to try to walk out, pain or no pain. We will see who can stand the most pain. Day 173. Another death. The one called Will. The one with the broken finger. He had missing for a week. Yesterday the Bikura went several kilometers northeast as if following a beacon, and found the remains near the grave ravine. Evidently a branch had snapped while he was climbing to grasp some chalma fronds. Death must have been instantaneous when he broke his neck. But it is where he fell that is important. The body, if one could call it that, was lying between two great mud cones marking the burrows of the large red insect that took cold fire mantises. Carpet beetles might have been a more apt sphere. In the past few days the insect had stripped the corpse clean to the bone. Little was left to be found, except the skeleton, some random shreds of tissue and tendon, and the cruciform, still attached to the rib cage like some splendid cross packed in the sarcophagus of a long-dead pope. It is terrible, but I cannot help but feel some small sense of triumph beneath the sadness. There is no way that the cruciform can regenerate something out of these bare bones. Even the terrible illogic of this accursed parasite must respect the imperative of the law of conservation of mass. The Bikura I called Will has died the true death. The 310 truly are the 309 from this time on. Day 174. I am a fool. Today I inquired about Will, about his dying the true death. I was curious at the lack of reaction from the Bikura. They had retrieved the cruciform, but left the skeleton lying there. They had found it. There was no attempt to carry the remains to the basilica. During the night I had become concerned that I would be made to fill the role of the missing member of the 310. It is very sad, I said, that one of you has died the true death. What is to become the 310? Beta stared at me. He cannot die the true death, said the bald little androgyne. He is of the cruciform. Somewhat later, while continuing my mediscans of the tribe, I discovered the truth. The one I have tagged as Theta looks the same and acts the same, but now carries two cruciforms embedded in his flesh. I have no doubt that this is one Bikuras who will tend toward corpulence in coming years, swelling and repelling like some obscene E. coli cell in a petri dish. When he, she, it dies, two will leave the tomb and 310 will be complete once more. I believe I'm going mad. Day 195. Weeks of studying the damned parasite and still no clue as to how it functions. Worse, I no longer care. What I care about now is more important. Why has God allowed this obscenity? Why have the Bikura been punished this way? Why was I chosen to suffer their fate? I ask those questions in nightly prayers, but I hear no answers, only the blood songs of the wind from the cleft. Day 214. The last 10 pages should have covered all of my field notes and technical conjectures. This will be my last entry before attempting the quiescence flame forest in the morning. There is no doubt that I have discovered the ultimate in stagnant human societies. The Bikura have realized the human dream of immortality and have paid for it with their humanity and their immortal souls. Edogar, I have spent so many hours wrestling with my fate, my lack of faith, but now, in this fearful corner of an all but forgotten world, riddled as I am with this loathsome parasite, I have somehow discovered a strength of belief, the likes of which I have not known since you and I were boys. I now understand the need for faith, pure, blind, fly in the face of reason faith, as a small life preserved in the wild and endless sea of universe ruled by unfeeling laws and totally indifferent to the small reasoning beings that inhabit it. Day after day I have tried to leave the cleft area, and day after day I have suffered the pain so terrible that has become a tangible part of my world, like this too small sun or the green and lapis sky. Pain has become my ally, my guardian angel, my remaining link with humanity. The cruciform does not like pain, nor do I, but like the cruciform, I am willing to use it to serve my purpose, and I will do so consciously, not not instinctively, like the mindless mass of alien tissue embedded me to. This thing only seek a mindless avoidance of death by any means. I do not wish to die, but I welcome pain and death rather than an eternity of mindless life. Life is sacred. I still hold to that as a core element of the churches through talks and teaching these past 2800 years. Then life has been so cheap, but even more sacred is the soul. I realize now that what I was trying to do with the Armagast, that was offer the church not a rebirth, but only a transition to a false life such as this poor walking corpse inhabit. In the church is meant to die. It must do so, but do so gloriously, in the full knowledge of its rebirth in Christ. It must go into the darkness, not willingly, but well, bravely and firm of faith, like the millions who have gone before us, keeping faith with all those generations facing death in the isolated silence of death camps and nuclear fireballs and cancer wards and pogroms, going into the darkness, if not hopefully, then prayerfully, that there is some reasons for it all, something worth the price of all that pain, all those sacrifices. All those before us have gone into the darkness without assurance of logic or fact of persuasive theory, with only a slender thread of hope or or all too shakeable conviction of faith. And if they have been able to sustain that slim hope in the face of darkness, then so must I, and so must the Church. I no longer believe that any surgery or treatment can cure me of this thing that infects me, but if someone can separate it and study it and destroy it, even at the cost of my death, I will be well satisfied. The flame forests are as quiet as they will ever be. To bed now. I leave before dawn. Day 215. There is no way out. 14 kilometers into the forest. Stray fires and bursts of current, but penetrable. 3 weeks of walking would have got me through. The cruciform will not let me go. The pain was like a heart attack that would not stop. Still I struggled forward, stumbling and crawling through the ash. Eventually I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was crawling toward the cleft. I would turn away, walk a kilometer, crawl 50 meters, then lost consciousness again, and awake back where I have started. And all day this insane battle for my body went on. Before sunset the Bikura entered the forest. found me 5 kilometers from the cleft, and carried me back. Dear Jesus, why have you let this be? There is no hope, no unless someone comes looking for me. Again the attempt, again the pain, again the failure. Day 257. I am 68 standard years old today. Work goes on with the chapel I am building near the cleft. Attempted to descend to the river yesterday, but was turned back by Beta and 4 others. 1 local year of Hyperion, 1 year in purgatory, or is it hell? Day 311. Working on quarrying stones on the ledge below the shelf where the chapel is going up, and I made this discovery today. The arrestor rods. The Bikura must have thrown them over the edge when they murdered Tuk that night 223 days ago. These roads would allow me to penetrate the flame forest at any time if the cruciform would allow it. But it will not. If only they had not destroyed my medkits with the painkillers. But still, sitting here holding the rods today, I have an idea. My crude experiments with the med scanner have continued. 2 weeks ago, when Theta broke his leg in 3 places, I observed the reaction of the cruciform. The parasite did its best to block the pain. Theta was unconscious much of the time, and his body was producing incredible quantities of endorphin. But the break was a very painful one, and after 4 days the Bikura slashed Theta's throat and took his body to the basilica. It was easier for the cruciform to resurrect his corpse than to tolerate such pain over a long period. But before his murder, my scanner showed an appreciable treat of the cruciform's nematodes from some parts of the central nervous system. I do not know if it would be possible to inflict on oneself or to tolerate level of non-lethal pain sufficient to drive the cruciform out completely. But I am sure of one thing, the Bikura would not allow it. Today I sit on the ledge below the half-finished chapel and I consider possibilities. Day 438. The chapel is finished. It is my life's work. Tonight, when the Bikura went down into the cleft to their daily parody of worship, I said Mass at the altar of the newly erected chapel. I had baked the bread from the chalma floor, and I'm gonna finish that. In the morning, I will do what I have planned. Everything is in readiness. My journals and the medscan wafers will be in the pouch of woven Bestos fibers. That is the best I can do. The consecrated wine was only water, but it was dim light of sunset. It looked blood red and tasted of communion wine. The trick will be to penetrate deep enough into the flame forest. I will have to trust the tree is enough incipient activity from Tesla trees even during the quiet periods. Goodbye, Edugar. I doubt if you are still alive, and should you be. I see no way that we could be reunited, separated as we are not only by years of distance, but by a much wider gulf in the form of a cross. My hope of seeing you again shall not be placed on this life, but one to come. Strange to hear me speak like this again, is it not? I must tell you, Edugar, that after all these decades of uncertainty, and with great fear of what lies ahead, my heart and soul are nonetheless at peace. Oh my God, I am heartily sorry for having offended thee, and I detest all my sins, because of the loss of heaven and the pains of hell, but most of all because I have offended thee, my God, who art all good and deserving of all my love. I firmly resolve, with the help of thy grace, to confess my sins to the penance and to amend my life. Amend my life. Amen. Midnight. The sunset comes through the open chapel window and bathes the altar, the crudely carved chalice and me in light. The wind from the cleft rises in the last such chorus that with luck and God mercy I will ever hear. This is the final entry, said Leonor Hoyt. When the priest quit reading, the 6 pilgrims at the table raised their faces towards him as if they were awakening from a common dream. The consul grimaced upward and saw that Hyperion was much closer now, filling a third of the sky, banishing the stars with its cold radiance. I arrived some 10 weeks after I had last seen Father Dur, continued Father Hoist. His voice was a hoarse rasp. More than 8 years had passed on Hyperion. 7 years since the last entry in Father Dur's journal. The priest was visibly in pain now, his face paled to a sick luminescence and filled with perspiration. Within a month I found my way to Percibo Plantation upriver from Port Romance. He continued, forcing some strength into the voice. My assumption was that the fiber-plastic glowers might tell me the truth even if they would have nothing to do with the consulate of Home Rule authorities. I was right. The administrator of Percibo, a man named Orlandi, remembered Father Dur, as did Orlandi's new wife, the woman named Sampha, whom Father Dury mentioned in his journals. The plantation manager had tried to mount several rescue operations onto the plateau, but an unprecedented series of active seasons in the flame forest had made them abandon their attempts. After several years, they had given up hope that Dur or their man could still be alive. Nonetheless, Orlandi recruited 2 expert bush pilots to fly a rescue expedition up the cleft in the plantation skimmers. We stayed in the cleft itself for as long as we could, trying to terrain avoidance instruments and luck to got us to Bikura country. Even with bypassing most of the flame forest that way, we lost of the skimmers and 4 people to Tesla activity. Father Hoyt paused and swayed slightly. Gripping the edge of the table to steady himself, he cleared his throat and said, "There's little else to tell. We located the Bikura village. There were 70 of them, each as stupid and uncommunicative as Dur's notes has suggested. I managed to ascertain from them that Father Dur had died while trying to attempt the flame forest. The Bestos pouch had survived, and in it we found his journals and medical data." Hoyt looked out at the others a second and then glanced down. "We persuaded them to show us where Father Dur had died," he said. They had not buried him. His remains were badly burned and decomposed, but complete enough to show us that the intensity of the Tesla charges had destroyed the cruciform as well as his body. Father Dur had died the true death. We returned the remains to the Percibo Plantation, where he was buried following a full funeral mass. Hoyt took a deep breath. Over my strong objection, Mr. Orlandi destroyed the Bikura village and a section of the cleft walls with shaped nuclear charges he had brought from the plantation. I do not believe that any of the Bikura could have survived. As far as we could tell, the entrance to the labyrinth and the so-called basilica also must have been destroyed in the landslide. I had sustained several injuries during the expedition and thus had to remain at the plantation for several months before returning to the northern continent and booking passage to Paisalm. No one knows of these journals or their content except Mr. Orlandi. Monsignor Edgar, and whichever of his superior Monsignor Edgar chose to tell. As far as I know, the Church has issued no declaration relating to the journals of Father Paul de Rey. Father Hoyt had been struggling, and now he sat. Sweat dripped from his chain, and his face was blue-white in the reflection light of Hyperion. "Is that all?" asked Martin Silanus. "Yes," managed Father Hoyt. "Gentlemen and lady." Said Matt Hetmastin. "It is late. I suggest that you gather your luggage and rendezvous at our friends the Council's ship on Sphere 11 in 30 minutes or sooner. It will be using one of the 3 dropships to join you later." Most of the group was assembled in less than 15 minutes. The Templars had rigged a gangway from a work pier on the interior of the Sphere to the ship's top-tier balcony, and the Council led the way into the lounge as crew clones stowed luggage and departed. "A fascinating old instrument," said Colonel Cassad, and he ran one hand across the top of the Steinway. "Horp choid?" "Piano," said the Consul. "Prehagira. Are we all here?" "Everyone except Hoyt," said Brony Lamia, as she took a seat in the projection pit. Hetmaston entered. "The Hegemony warship has granted permission for you to descend to Kiet's spaceport," said the captain. He glanced around. "I will send a crew member to see if Mr. Hoyt needs assistance." "No," said the Consul. He modulated his voice. "I'd like to get him. Can you tell me the way to his quarters?" The 3-ship captain looked at the Consul for a long second and then reached into the folds of his robe. "Bon voyage," he said, handing over a wafer. "I will see you on the planet, sometime before our midnight departure time from the Sharkers Temple in Keats." The Consul bowed. It was a pleasure traveling within the protective branches of the tree. "Hetmastin," he said formally. Turning to the others, he gestured. "Please make yourself comfortable in the lounge or the library or the deck below this, or the deck below this. The ship will see to your needs and answer any questions you may have. You will depart as soon as Father Hoyt and I return." Alright, I will finish here. And it's time for lunch, and maybe I will listen to some music or do something. Read loud. Practice your pronunciation.